This summer's been a bit like being a football manager for me. I mentioned Alex Ferguson as opposed to Jose Mourinho, even though he's retired. And I've made a few good signings. And one of the excellent signings that I've made is Russ Barr. Russ Barr joined us after the summer, start of this term, from Brookfield Academy, which has been rated outstanding for a good while now. I keep wanting to say Brookside, but it's Brookfield Academy. Rated outstanding for a good while now, and he's joined us within the local authority to work with us on our school improvement programme for secondary. But he will cover many aspects of not just secondary, but primary in terms of the Ofsted framework. Okay, so thanks very much. Russ.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? Thank you. I think of myself as being a teacher, really, so I've got some learning objectives, which I hope Jeanette is going to put up on the board for me in a second. There you go. The aim is to try and give you a bit of an update in terms of Ofsted, both in terms of a few changes to the handbook and the subsidiary guidance that have been provided for schools and for inspectors, to clarify a few areas that are being particularly focused on at the minute, and to relate some of that to the work of governors. What I'm going to do first of all is just to give a kind of overview of the big issues, some of which we've already been talking about, and then I'm going to drill down a little bit into those to try and give you some further detail on specific issues. There will be two words that you hear me say on several occasions through this, and they will be impact and progress, because they are absolutely fundamental to the Ofsted well-being of our schools. Overall, we still have the same framework that we had before the summer. It's not a new handbook, but there have been a number of very important revisions in the wording, and people like me who carry out inspections occasionally were all called in at the beginning of this term for some extra training, and there was a certain emphasis placed on particular things. I've pulled out a few of them here in relation to students making expected and more than expected progress. I'll come back to that in a minute. Accuracy of assessment. Now that goes across all key stages. One of the things we noticed this year, and it's something that governors do need to be aware of, is that when we were collecting data from schools in relation to how they thought that they would perform over the summer, in some cases there was a very significant discrepancy between those projections and what actually happened. And again, as governors, that's something that you need to unpick. Why is that? Is that something to do with the assessment processes within the school? Why have we got that? Now, we've been through a challenging time in relation to things like grade boundaries shifting. So it is more difficult for teaching staff currently to be accurate in some cases. But it is very noticeable that in some cases we had maybe 15, 16% difference between projections and outcomes. And that's something that I think Ofsted are going to want to pick up on. There is a greater focus on the use of pupil premium and groups. Ian's already referred to that, and I'll come back to that. If it was possible, the role of governance has been highlighted even further. And again, I think we'll go into that. And it is now about consistent practice across the piece, if schools wish to be judged as good or better. We've spoken a little bit about English and Maths. There is no doubt that for Derbyshire, these are absolutely key issues. I will go into greater detail, but certainly in terms of the biggest challenge we face as an authority, it's probably to do with progress in English. Actually, it's not even probably, it's definitely to do with progress in English. Second bullet point there reinforces my earlier point about accuracy of assessment, but that relates it specifically to early years and to Key Stage 1. An area where we've seen particular strengthening of the wording, again I'll come back to this, is in relation to behaviour which is something that perhaps wasn't expected. And then finally, bullet point there, in relation to the responsibility of schools to provide independent careers and guidance. And by that they mean provided by somebody who is not employed by the school. And again, that is now part of the inspection framework. So, if we drill down a bit further, as I said, progress and achievement. Ian pointed out now that they are talking about progress for all groups. And we're not talking about aggregated progress here. You will find schools, when you look at their progress, that the picture for the entire cohort looks like it's in line or better than national average. But then when you start to unpick that and you look at the performance, say, of students in receipt of pupil premium, or SEN students, or children in care, you start to get a slightly different picture. That picture is fundamental now in relation to the judgments that are made. You could have a cohort where the progress was better than national average overall, but because one of those groups was significantly below, that school would not be judged good. Okay. And so it's very important to understand this business of pupils' different starting points and the different groups that they belong to, because it will impact on the overall judgments about achievement. And then, as you know, because we have a domino inspection framework, if one goes, if achievement is not good, chances are teaching and learning is not good, leadership and management, including governance, is not good. Because that's how it works. To reinforce that, I've just put up for you there some of the wording now from the grade descriptor in the handbook for good achievement. And you can see that running through that, you've got a number of themes. Pupil premium runs through it as a theme. English and maths both run through it. So we are talking about students on pupil premium achieving as well as all the others, or at least having a closing gap, their achievement rising significantly if a school is to be judged as good. We are talking about progress across each year group in English and maths being judged to be at least in line with expectations, not just at the end of the key stages. That's an important shift. I need to just exemplify that a little bit further, if I can, in relation to, I'll speak initially about Key Stage 4, because that, as Ian's already said, is a big issue for the authority. But the same applies in terms of progress between Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. The judgment in relation to achievement is tied more and more to progress. The question here was about our 5EM figure, and our 5EM figure for Key Stage 4 improved. And yet we've seen a number of schools suffer a decline in Ofsted grade, even though that was the case. And that relates almost entirely to progress. We had one school judged outstanding in 2011 that has gone into a category. And the chief reason for that was because their expected levels of progress in English, so 3LP, 3 levels of progress in English between Key Stage 4, was about 15% below national average. And that was more or less sufficient for them to decline in that way. So I don't think we can underestimate how important that is as a feature in the current framework. Pupil premium. From the point of view of governors, it is not enough just to know what it is being spent on. Now, it is a substantial amount of money now in a lot of schools. £900 per student is a lot of money. And just knowing what it's spent on now is not sufficient. It's all about that other word that I used, impact. What impact is that expenditure having on the outcomes for those students? How are you as governors being made aware of that? Do you know what the impact is? Do you know what it was in terms of the summer outcomes? Do you know what it is in terms of different year groups within the school now? Do all students who are eligible for it benefit from it? Or is it just those who are eligible but are underachieving? Because Ofsted's point of view would be that it should be all of them. A little side issue, but I'm going to mention it. Is the information about it clear on the school website? One of the first things a lead inspector will do, even before they ring up the head to tell them about the inspection, is probably look at the school website and check what it tells them on there about the use of pupil premium. Do you know where to find that on the school website? Is that information clear? Because it needs to be. This is a new one in terms of the inspection handbook, but it's an important one. You will recollect, going back quite a while now, a huge fuss when the funding for school sports partnerships was ended just prior to the Olympics, and there was a big lobbying campaign went on, and some of it was reinstated in terms of what they now call school games organisers, which went into secondary schools. Last academic year, the decision was taken to shift some of the funding into primary schools. So all primary schools now get a baseline figure of £8,000 plus £5 per pupil in addition in order to spend on school sport and PE. And as they do, when they give you a sum of money, they also increase the accountability. So now it features within the handbook and within the framework. And again, we come back to that, the I word, it's about impact. Again, it's not sufficient to know just what this is being spent on, it's about the impact that it's having. And they're very clear that they are expecting impact in terms of educational attainment, healthy lifestyles, participation. Are there more kids actually taking part in sporting activity as a result of this money? But also, interestingly, competition. Is the school more successful in sporting competition as a result of this money? Now, again, it's really important, I think, that governors have a clear idea about how this funding is being used. Just anecdotally, when this arrived in schools, I did hear one or two cases where head teachers rushed off and spent it on table tennis coaching, new table tennis tables, which probably seemed like a really good idea at the time until we saw what we were being asked to account for. And I think, it's very important that there's proper scrutiny of that funding and how it's used. I mentioned about behaviour. Interestingly, in the grade description now for outstanding behaviour, it says that pupils consistently display a thirst for knowledge and a love of learning, including independent group and whole class work, which has a very strong impact on their progress in lessons. Pupils' attitude to learning are of an equally high standard across subjects, years, classes, and with different staff. They have raised the bar a little bit further on that one. And that thirst for knowledge thing is a very interesting new form of words. Knowledge actually is written much larger now in the Ofsted framework and in the new curriculum, both at primary and secondary, than it was before. It's less about skills, it's more about what they know. And they have to demonstrate it now, not just in relation to teaching and learning and achievement, but also in relation to behaviour, if you want to get those higher judgments. And they will do lots and lots of triangulation, so there'll be lots of talking to students in lots of different settings, at lunchtime, at break, when they're coming in and out of school, between lessons, in lessons. asking them about typicality of behaviour. Is this what it's normally like? Okay. What happens when? Scenarios, that kind of thing. Okay. One subtle little change in terms of leadership and management before I talk about governance specifically is that top point, which is about the contribution that the school makes to system leadership. Does the leadership of the school help support leadership elsewhere? It's actually quite a positive thing, because we do have lots of schools now where head teachers are actually going out and supporting in other settings. And there is capacity now within the reports and within the Ofsted framework to have that recognised. Okay. Let's talk about governance particularly. This next chunk all comes from the subsidiary guidance. These are the things that our inspectors are told to look for and ask about in relation to governance. So, statutory duties is the bottom line. Are governors aware of what they are? Are they being carried out? Does the school, does the governing body have a clear idea about the quality of teaching and learning in the school? And again, I come back to the same word. It's about the impact of teaching and learning in the school. Do they know where good progress takes place and what the link is between teaching and learning in different subject areas, in different year groups? Can they identify and articulate that? Where is the best progress? Where is progress less than expected? It is all about impact. Point at the bottom that I particularly want to pull out, and I'll mention this again, is to do with decisions about salary progression. We're now in a new system of performance management and performance-related pay. In effect, national pay and conditions went at the end of last year. And the governors have a key role now in terms, they always did, but it's really even larger now in terms of performance management and pay progression. And that link between progress, teaching and learning, and performance management. And it's being able to describe that for an inspector. Do you know how decisions are made about progression? Is a key question. I'll just leave that hanging there for a second, because I want to talk about what we've learned from some of the inspections that we've had recently. A common theme, whether it's primary or secondary, is progress. I can't stress that enough. As Ian said, we've had a significant amount of inspection activity. Just in the secondary sector, in the first 20 days of this academic year, we had 6 full inspections and 4 monitoring visits. Okay? There is a lot of activity taking place. And the experience suggests that governors are being asked a level of questions much higher than we'd previously experienced. In terms of data, it's not enough now just to know about data dashboard. You do need to have that awareness of the other issues that we've spoken about tonight. Progress in relation to key groups, English and maths, and variations that exist across the school in terms of different year groups and different subject areas. It will be expected that you have that level of understanding and detail. And then finally, that last one, just underlining that point about pay and progression. In terms of the evidence base that is used for decisions in relation to pay progression. I'll just exemplify that a little bit. For example, if an inspection team comes into a school and they look at the outcomes, and those outcomes show achievement being below expectations, and yet every member of staff is sitting at the top of UPS 3, they will ask the question, how can it be that staff are getting paid at this level when the outcomes they produce are below expectation? And that might be a question that they ask governors. So that awareness of process, how those decisions are arrived at, is something that I think you all need to be aware of in order to be able to answer that kind of question. Okay. That's a very rapid whip through a number of very big issues. So I'm more than happy to take some questions on all of that, if anybody's got any.
Marshall and Carol Reference from Chelsea. Having just had Ofsted in a week or so ago, I can't emphasise enough that they are looking for better than expected progress for those groups that you mentioned. And I think increasingly different times, that will be the next one. So they're looking that those students in pupil premium, preschool meals, special educational needs, and I think gifted and talented, make more progress than the other students of your school, not against the national average. So they're looking at all the pupils in the school and then they're making sure that those groups of children make not 3 levels of progress, but 4 or 5 levels of progress. And that's what we were asked as governors. Are those children making more than expected progress against other children in your school?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very, very important. I mean, in terms of pupil premium, it's very clear that they have to make more than expected progress, otherwise the gap doesn't close. You know? So that's writ very clearly into expectations about pupil premium. And there are 2 figures nationally in terms of expected progress, key stage 1 to key stage 2, key stage 2 to key stage 4, and more than expected progress. And they will expect the school to be at least hitting those figures to be judged to be good. You know, if either of those figures falls below, they'll have a question mark in terms of rates of progress for particular groups. So yes, I absolutely agree. And that's certainly been borne out in other inspections that we've had. Anything else? I mean, if you don't want to ask questions in the group, at the end of the evening, if you want to call me for 5 minutes to ask any questions, then by all means do so. Okay. Thank you.